Welcome to the Fully Mindful, where we explore what it means to live with intention, creativity, authenticity, and connection. I'm your host, Melissa Chareau, mindfulness and breathwork facilitator, neurodivergent lawyer and coach, and fellow human navigating this wild and beautiful ride we call life. On this podcast, we dive deep with interviews featuring inspiring guests, share solo mini episodes packed with guided mindfulness practices to help you center and thrive, and mix things up with tangents and sidebars, where my friend and fellow podcaster Debbie Harrell from the New World Normal joins me for some real, random, and meaningful conversations. So if you're ready to pause, reflect, and expand, you're in the right place. Let's get fully mindful. Well, hello, everybody. This is Melissa Chareau with The Fully Mindful, where we delve into what it truly means to embody mindfulness and presence in our daily lives while uncovering our intrinsic worth and purpose. I'm a neurodivergent lawyer, a mindfulness teacher, and embodiment breathwork coach. And on The Fully Mindful, we have candid conversations with inspiring creatives, wellness leaders, and social disruptors, exploring how they've discovered their purpose and cultivate a mindful, connected existence. And today, I'm really excited to have Kat Thompson, the inspiring leader of Fractal Soul, a holistic wellness organization specializing in psilocybin therapy. With over 20 years of high-tech and entrepreneurial experience at companies like Nike, Twitter, and Intel, Kat has excelled in strategy, operations, consulting, management, the works. She's a lifelong student of mental health and healing, and she discovered the transformative power of psilocybin, aka the magic of mushrooms, starting with microdosing during her corporate career to manage stress and enhance focus. She later used higher doses to heal trauma and gain profound insights into life and love. And I can't wait to talk about that. At Fractal Soul, she leads a team dedicated to helping individuals manage anxiety, process trauma, using holistic approaches. Kat's work spans the gamut as she works with corporate leaders, women dealing with anxiety, and relationship wounds. So I'm happy to have you here today, Kat. Welcome.
Thank you so much. Thank you for having me. I really appreciate it.
Yeah. And for some of the listeners who might be in other states, they might be like, wait, what? Psilocybin, magic mushrooms? What the what? Mm-hmm. So here in Oregon, this is now a legal practice. Is that right?
Yeah, that's right. It rolled out last year. And so we are a little over a year in now to this legal therapeutic option here in Oregon, which is great.
I'm just curious if you know, are there any other states that are considering this or have done this yet?
Yeah, there's several states that are considering actually. There's a psychedelic legalization tracker website actually that you can go out to, but the one that's the closest I know is Colorado. They've actually introduced a bunch of laws and now that's just passing through that kind of framework. So they're not quite legal yet, but they will probably be the second state in the nation to legalize.
Yeah. And just so, folks have some sort of idea, before we get into your personal story, which I very much want to get into, can you give us a little bit of the bird's eye view of how this came to be a legal practice in the state of Oregon?
Yeah, I mean, I don't have a lot of the knowledge around the politics beforehand because I wasn't one of the early, adopters down in Salem wanting to help this become legalized. I was kind of just doing this in my own private personal life. And it was actually after the Twitter layoff that I experienced that I started looking into this as a professional career. But I do know that voters, they approved it in 2020, and then it took 2 full years to actually develop the framework of the rules, right, that we now are operating in. And if you copy and paste the rules from the website, the government website, into Google Docs, it's about 125 pages of rules. So this is not a small framework. And I know that the state went to a lot of effort. They had panels of experts and, hundreds of research documents and everything to formulate these rules. So they really went through a methodical and lengthy process to figure out what's going to be the safest way to deliver this framework to Oregonians and really to the world. So I know that it was a 2-year process, very lengthy.
And just so people know, because they may have no idea, this is not just like anybody that gets to take psilocybin. It's not like legalized marijuana where anyone in any of the states that have legalized recreational marijuana can go into a store and buy mushrooms. This is considered a therapeutic process. It's highly regulated, as you mentioned, hundreds of pages of rules. And you have to have gone through a particular amount of training and I don't know if it's a certification or a license, right? It's one of those to
Yeah.
do it. That's okay.
Yeah.
Certification and a license.
Yeah.
So it's
Yeah.
not just anyone off the street being like, I'm going to deliver psilocybin to somebody. This is a highly regulated area, very safe, very effective, and not just something that anyone can go do, right?
Yeah, that's right. I think one of the most common misconceptions is that this is similar to a dispensary model with cannabis, and nothing could be further from the truth. Even with medical marijuana, right, which people will say that there's a lot of benefit to pain management and things like that with medical marijuana. You cannot just go in and purchase product and take it home. That is not how the psilocybin framework works in Oregon. So what you have these licensed, what are called service centers that I guess would be kind of the equivalent of a dispensary, but again, you're not going in to just purchase it and take it home. The service center is somewhere that if you are pre-approved and by appointment only, you have to go through intake forms and all of that, but you can legally go into one of these service centers, purchase a dose of psilocybin product, and then consume it on site under the guidance and watchful care of a licensed facilitator. So that's essentially how the framework works. And that's a really, really big difference from just going into a dispensary and then buying whatever you want and taking it home and taking however much you want.
Yeah, really different. Although I will note, if anyone saw it, and I think it was either the Oregonian or the Willamette Week, there was a pop-up dispensary for a very short period of time, very illegally in downtown.
Yeah, it was that one on Burnside, I think.
Yeah,
It was called the Shroom Shop. And eventually, the feds came in and busted it.
So for a very short time, if you lived in Oregon or you came to Oregon, you could buy mushrooms, but that is not what this particular framework is for at all. And that is definitely was not and is not legal to have a dispensary. So
Yeah, absolutely. It's kind of like we're playing in a different arena now. This isn't just about recreational use. This isn't the 1960s all over again. This is actually trying to fix mental health problems that are on the rise.
Right, definitely on the rise, especially here in Oregon, although worldwide. So,
Certainly.
I mean, it's quite something to go from being in the tech world or in the corporate world, right? You had Twitter and Nike and Intel, and then okay, yes, I get that you experienced a layoff, but a lot of people aren't going to just go, you know what, I think I'm going to go from this corporate world to, I think I'm going to be a psilocybin facilitator. So how did you get to that decision?
Yeah. Well, they say seeing is believing. So I like to preface this story of mine with that, but I definitely decided to explore it after my layoff. It wasn't like an instant decision, but as you mentioned earlier, I had already been microdosing for about 2 years. It was kind of during most of my last tenure at Twitter. And I started that after Measure 110 was passed, which was the decriminalization for personal use of mushrooms. So again, just kind of a distinction there that Measure 110 and Measure 109 are different beasts. However, I was microdosing personally for that, and it really helped with a lot of like day-to-day symptom management of depression and anxiety and stress, and just kind of helped me be a more creative problem solver and more, empathetic and connected to my coworkers. So in general, it had just really a lot of day-to-day kind of therapeutic effects, I would say. But I hadn't actually taken a larger macro dose, and so after my layoff, I decided that as I'm exploring this, I really need to kind of know what I'm getting into fully. And I had heard from multiple people that taking the microdoses versus the macrodoses is almost like taking two completely different substances, right? Once you cross that threshold, the so-called threshold of the consciousness altering, it's really a different experience. So I did a couple of those in a very therapeutic context, sacredness and all of that, and approaching it with care and respect, and was just completely blown away at the power and the healing that happened in my own life. I inherited a lot of generational trauma. I know we've talked about my professional career, but on a personal level, lots of family trauma up the chain. And so had a difficult childhood, hadn't healed from a lot of those things, had a lot of triggers and mental health issues just from that. And I really feel like, 1 to 2 so-called treatments or experiences of psilocybin helped me heal things that I hadn't been able to heal in decades of talk therapy and self-help books and like all these other things. So it definitely made a believer out of me after just experiencing my own healing. And that was when I got a little bit more serious at, looking into this as a career for sure.
Let's take a quick break.
Hey everybody, this is Melissa with The Fully Mindful. It's the new year, and I bet you're feeling the need to unlock your full potential and embrace empowerment, or maybe something completely different. Well, I'm excited to offer a new program with one-on-one breathwork and coaching sessions. We'll embark on a truly transformative journey of self-discovery, combining conscious, connected breathwork and embodiment coaching, and more. So contact me, Melissa, at The Fully Mindful, for your transformative session today. Right. And just for the listeners and the viewers, I mean, microdosing is, you're not really getting high, right? I shouldn't say high because that makes it sound like you're using it recreationally. Whereas I understand you were using it really for the therapeutic purposes, even on the microdosing level. Is that right?
Yeah, absolutely. The way that we define microdosing at Fractal Soul is I call it professionally appropriate. So that means usually 1 to 2 milligrams. If we're talking about psilocybin analyte, it's very, very small amounts. And professionally appropriate means that you can still have conversations like this, right? You can still present to your boss. You can still work. You can work out. You could go grocery shopping. It really doesn't impact your daily life. It kind of just elevates your life a little bit, but it should feel very, very subtle in terms of the effect. That's a true microdose. When people call, larger, like a gram of mushroom, and they call that a microdose, that's not truly a microdose. It's more of what I call a social dose.
Right,
So
right.
those
You're
two,
definitely going to be feeling the impacts.
for sure. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. And then the macro doses are pretty high. I think you were getting to.
Yeah, they are. But, also this is something I go through in my consults with new clients as well, that people are surprised to know that even within the macrodose world or the consciousness altering, like above that threshold, there is a wide range as well. So I think a lot of times people think it's like one or the other. You have to microdose or macrodose. And so even within this macrodose world, you can choose a gentler dose, something that we know is going to be consciousness altering, but it feels very soft and gentle. And then kind of on up the chain into more mystical types of experiences, that sort of thing. So there is a range of experiences even after, as you step above that consciousness altering threshold, if that makes sense.
Right. And we were talking before we hopped on the episode today about Michael Pollan's book, How to Change Your Mind, and the Netflix 4-episode series, I think, based on that book. And in that book, and in the series, they talk about, it seems like much higher dosing. At least it's portrayed that way, as these very mind-blowing, literally conscious, elevating, opening doses. And so what you're saying is that you don't always have to do it that way. So if you're nervous about it, you want to try something for that to treat maybe an anxiety or trauma that is unresolved, you don't necessarily have to go 100%.
Right.
You can go something less than that.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, so through the state of Oregon, we are legally allowed to dose people up to 50 milligrams of what's called psilocybin analyte. That's the actual amount of psilocybin inside of a dried mushroom. So we're not talking dried mushroom weight, it's actual amount of psilocybin, but that amount is such a huge amount. You would really only want to take someone there if they had a lot of what we call blunting factors, right? So their serotonin system has been really desensitized and downregulated through usually decades of SSRI use or other substances that impact serotonin. So for someone who doesn't have those blunting factors, we typically follow the Johns Hopkins recommendation, which I think is also discussed in the How to Change Your Mind, either the documentary or the book. But in general, the 20 to 30 milligrams of psilocybin analyte is kind of considered that sweet spot. We are always aiming to get clients into the therapeutic sweet spot, right? There's kind of a bell curve where if you go too low, it might be a little underwhelming for them, especially for the amount that they've paid and the effort that they've gone to and kind of the expectation as well. But if you dose too high, obviously you're tipping over, you're going past that therapeutic sweet spot into overwhelm territory. That 20 to 30 milligrams is usually reliably a pretty sweet spot in terms of kind of hitting that therapeutic zone where it's, it should feel intense. Like intense means results, but it shouldn't feel overwhelming or really scary. And so you mentioned people who have really high anxiety towards the experience itself, or for people who have severe trauma, big T trauma, we might recommend bringing them in for what we call a meet the medicine dose, which is a very small, it might be like 8 milligrams. It might not even be, it's above a microdose, but it's not even consciousness altering. And that just kind of helps them establish a positive relationship with the center and the facilitators and with the medicine itself, so that they do come in for a secondary one and they go a little bit larger, then they feel more safe, if that makes sense. So that's pretty
You're kind of giving them that muscle memory, so to speak, of, this was a safe place for me to be. My body feels okay here. I can do a little bit more for the more therapeutic situation.
Yeah, it just calms some of the fear for sure.
Yeah, and I can imagine people would want that. And anyone who's experienced big T trauma, or even a series of little T traumas over a very long period of time, is probably, I would imagine, a little bit reticent, right? Sometimes about giving up control, depending on the nature of their trauma. And that is, in fact, what is happening. You're releasing the reins a little bit, knowing that there's somebody there to guide you through it, but ultimately you are releasing the reins.
Yeah, absolutely. I like to tell people, even though sometimes this is called therapy or has therapeutic value, this is not at all talk therapy, right? Your partner in this whole thing is not a therapist. It's not even really the facilitator. The facilitator is there to help support you and to kind of hold space for you. But the partner in this is really kind of the psilocybin, is acting as this medicine. I think it's really important to be able to just go through this yourself with the medicine, and it's self-healing, it's self-therapy. I don't know if that makes sense, but that's a really important point, that because people come in and I think that sometimes they really feel like, well, the facilitator is going to do this for me. No, you're doing this for you. You have to choose to release those reins, as you were saying, and it feels a little bit like kind of stepping into a river current. Right. So you choose to step into the current, and you choose to go with the flow. And some people step into that current and then they just immediately start fighting the current. Right. So this is where the facilitator can help support you and guide you a bit through, and using non-directive methods, but can help you do some breathing exercises or things like that to help get you through that resistance. But ultimately, it's up to you to hand over the control or not.
Right.
So, yeah.
Yeah, I'm interested in, and we've danced around it. We've had a lot of conversation already about what this looks like. But if you could just take us through the typical journey, what is it that, like, when somebody is interested in Fractal Soul and they want to experience a journey, take us through from that point of contact forward. How does it work?
Yeah, sure. So the therapeutic framework in Oregon, first of all, there's 3 phases to it, right? It's not like just calling up a service center and making an appointment like you would for a massage. So you actually have to, I know, and a lot of people do that. We get calls all the time where people are like, can you fit me in tomorrow? And we're like, this isn't a fit-in type of situation. This is a making sure you're safe. And of course, we want to serve as many people as we can. And it's open to all adults who are 21 and over around the world, as long as you fit a few screening questions that we must ask legally. So from that first contact, it really kind of goes into an intake and screening where we ask a few medical questions, just making sure that it's going to be safe for you to take psilocybin here. Again, we are not medical doctors, but we just know some screening questions to ask that are higher risk. After that, if we don't see any problematic areas, then you would move into what's called the preparation phase. So preparation is kind of reviewing all the intake forms, planning out your journey, maybe going through a few preparation exercises like journaling or meditation or some breath work, just to kind of help prime the pump for releasing and letting go. And then after the preparation, of course, is the big day. It's your administration session. So that's the journey itself. And then afterwards is something that's really important. It's called integration. So integration is applying all of the things that you learned in your session to your daily life. So that's where we really see lasting change, is when people practice integration with intention and care. So that's 3 phases of the therapeutic framework in Oregon.
Some people might not know what the medicine actually looks like. Are you eating mushrooms? Is it a pill? Is it a liquid? What is it?
Yeah, that's a great question too. I know some other service centers do like whole dried mushrooms, but we actually have a finely ground mushroom powder. And that's because at these other service centers who have whole dried mushrooms, a lot of times they just make the clients grind it up themselves using an herb grinder or something else. And so for just kind of ease of dosing and convenience, we just have our supplier grind it into a really fine powder. So it comes in these cute little black glass jars, and it's just a powder. We use an albino strain of mushroom primarily, so it's like an off-white color. And yeah, you just kind of dump the powder into a mug, and then you'll add a hot drink of choice, whether it's tea or some people like hot cocoa. Mushroom cut cocoa is delicious. And that's how they actually consume their dose. So yeah, it's just a finely ground powder, and it's got a fairly mild taste, maybe a little bit earthy, but it's, yeah, usually not too bad.
Yeah, I was going to say the mushrooms don't taste terribly good. So I could see why you would want to have it be in a tea form or
Yeah.
a hot cocoa form or something that might taste a little bit better because it has a little bit of a pungent flavor just on its own, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah,
And I think different strains are different as well. Like for some
right.
reason, this albino strain seems a little milder, but it's definitely tastes like mushroom, right?
Yeah,
That's what
yeah,
you're eating.
that's what
Um,
you're eating. Yeah.
right.
So take us through like what the journey looks like for someone.
Again, it kind of follows a bell curve, right? Like everything does. And so there's the three phases of that. There's kind of this like come up phase or onset phase that happens. And then there's kind of the bulk of the journey. And then the psilocybin doesn't just leave your body all of a sudden. So there's a very gradual kind of come down phase as well. Usually it depends on your metabolism and how quickly your stomach will digest, and then your liver will convert the psilocybin to a simpler molecule called psilocin. That's what actually goes up into your brain, and that's what's actually psychoactive. So that whole process, it just depends on how your metabolism is, but some people start feeling it in just 5 minutes. Some people it takes half hour or 40 minutes, but usually that time is good to just kind of wait and chill and get into the music or do some breath work with your facilitator, or just ready yourself, ready your mind and your body. So once you start feeling the medicine in your body, then usually typical things are chills, yawns, maybe some giggles. Your skin might tingle a little bit, or your muscles might feel kind of almost like you took a muscle relaxant. Those are some bodily indications, right, that your journey is starting. So at some point, there's always what I call the threshold moment, right? Where it is kind of like a conscious decision of, okay, I'm going to step into this altered space or this different experience. And that looks very different for everyone. Sometimes it's a visual, like a door appears, right? And other times it's more of a feeling of being pulled somewhere. Or sometimes there'll actually be like a voice in your head asking you, like, hey, you should cry, or you should let go, or you should do this, right? So it looks different for everyone. But at that point, that's usually when resistance will come up, if it's going to. So sometimes there's almost like a grappling period of people like, I wanted to let go, but I'm having a hard time doing
Sure.
it. So that's
Yeah.
that threshold moment, but it inevitably passes, for good, for better, for worse. And then once you're in kind of the bulk of the journey, I always like to tell new clients that haven't experienced this before that psychedelics go in cycles as well. So it's kind of a little bit like the analogy of snorkeling, where if you're up on the water and then you see something down that you might want to go dive down and like look. You kind of go in for a while, right? And then after a while, you're like, okay, I need some air, I need a breather, and you like pop back up to the surface.
Uh-huh.
So it's almost as like inhale, exhale of breathing that happens during a psychedelic journey. And usually each of those sessions kind of has its own little theme, where you might be processing, some grief in one, and some wonder and awe in another, or you might be thinking about your future in another, right? They each kind of have their own theme, which is kind of cool. And then after about 3 hours, psilocybin has a half-life of 3 hours in the body. You're going to kind of start to feel yourself, those effects coming down a little bit. But again, it's not just like a cliff of like, okay, I'm out of it. Usually you'll have those cycles, but they'll get kind of like smaller and smaller until you just feel like, okay, I'm back in my normal state. So that's essentially what a journey looks like. And it usually lasts about 4 to 6 hours, just depending on the person.
Sure. And I was just thinking, I do a lot of breath work, and I do all kinds of breath work, but I will also lead conscious, connected breath work journeys, which
Yeah.
I think were really started. It's basically holotropic breathing, like Stan Grof did, who was one of the early LSD researchers and practitioners before all the funding got taken away and it became illegal to do that. And, one of the things that I notice is when I lead a journey for someone, they set an intention, but it almost doesn't matter, because whatever's supposed to happen in the journey will happen regardless of, I coach people throughout the whole thing. I have no idea. I'm very intentional with what I say,
Yeah.
but it almost doesn't matter what I say, right? Because it's what the person needs to experience in that moment. It sounds very similar, like
Yeah.
whatever they're supposed to experience
Yeah.
and are ready to experience is what
Yeah.
they experience.
Absolutely. I think this is an important piece to coach our clients during the preparation as well. We'll have clients coming in with a laundry list of intentions, right? Which are really expectations. And it's like, I
Right.
want to get my entire life fixed, right? They've got 20 things. And then we have people come in and they have no clue. They're like, I don't even know. And somewhere in the middle there, I think, is a good way to approach this, where you can absolutely offer up your intentions. It's almost like a prayer or a sacrament, right? To this kind of spiritual experience that you are inevitably going to have. And yet, very similar to what you said, I feel like there is some unknown mechanism by which this, and I keep calling it medicine, goes into you and it is able to identify what you truly need. And so it's very common afterwards for our clients to leave saying, well, I didn't get the journey I wanted, but I got the journey I needed, you know?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. And so that's a really common thing to say.
That's really interesting. And I think you were saying earlier with your own experience, some of these things that you had maybe a lifetime of struggle with and lots of experience with talk therapy. Nothing against talk therapy. It can be very
Absolutely.
effective and
Yeah.
complementary for all of these modalities,
Yeah.
but it wasn't necessarily effective, at least in a very big way for you for some of these things. So when you experience this journey and when other people experience this journey, are they literally free of some of that stuff?
Yeah, I mean, like, at risk of sounding like this is, like, have you ever seen those ads where it says, here's all the results, and then down at the bottom it says, results not typical? And
Right,
I
right.
saw one of those the other day, and I was like, man, like, it's the opposite for us. Like, it's actually an atypical result when someone doesn't get like profound healing in one journey. But yeah, I would say, that is absolutely a typical result for us, for sure.
I mean, that's really astounding. And this is why this is such an exciting area because so much of what we humans experience, again, whether it's big T trauma, something really, I mean, and a lot of people, right, they denigrate their trauma, right? They're like, oh, well, I didn't, I wasn't
Yeah.
raped, or I
Yeah.
didn't have a horrible car accident, or somebody didn't die. None of
Yeah.
that happened to me. I just was, I don't know, neglected my whole childhood, right? Like nobody was
Complex trauma. It's no big deal. Yeah.
yeah. But we do that, right? And part of that is survival. We downplay our trauma to protect ourselves. So I do recognize that. But
Mhm.
so you're suggesting, I think, and what's really exciting is that whatever kind of trauma it is, it literally can be resolved in one journey.
Sometimes, right? I mean, obviously, everybody is different. And I will say that each journey has its own theme, right? I said earlier that each of the cycles has a little mini theme. It
Right.
feels like those little mini themes kind of will come around a bigger, larger satellite type of theme. So I'll just give you an example. In my very first journey, I had an intention to heal some of my childhood wounds. And it was a very vague intention. It wasn't like down to the level of detail of certain memories. It was more just like, I have read every self-help book in the universe known to man. I've been through years of talk therapy, and those things do help. But I tend to be a very cognitive and intellectual person anyways, trying to intellectualize everything. And I certainly understood with my prefrontal cortex why things had happened, but it felt like it wasn't accessing an area of my brain where the actual hurt was, right? And so
Right.
when I went into the psychedelic session, my own psychedelic session, I swear it's like the medicine just burrowed straight back to wherever it was. And there was this room with no doors or windows, right? And it just created a door and it opened it and it was like, here it is, like, let's get it out.
Right.
That's what I mean about that. I think talk therapy can really help make sense of things and kind of sort through emotions and have that support. And that's so helpful. And there's great self-help books out there too. I read a lot on parental wounds and generational trauma. And so I understood, but it was the actual healing that needed to be released, right? So does that mean that all of the hurt I'd ever experienced in my life got released in one session? Absolutely not. But I definitely felt like I healed from my childhood wounds in a very, very core, deep way in that first one. And then my second one went on to some other stuff that I had, other more adult type of trauma and grief. So each one kind of has its own theme, but definitely don't expect a miracle all in one out of like one.
You're like a brand new person when you come
Yeah,
out.
that's what I'm trying to go for is expect healing in like one area, but not the laundry list of your entire life.
Right,
Yeah.
right. Yes. I mean, that would be a true miracle.
Right.
That
Not
could
a
happen.
miracle cure, but it's definitely highly effective, especially when people feel stuck. That's when people come to us because they're like, I've been in talk therapy for 10 years. I've been doing EMDR for 5 years. I made progress and now I'm stuck, right? Or I've been on SSRIs for 10 years. I'm not feeling any different. I'm stuck. I need something else. This is that something else that will help them kind of reset and get unstuck.
Right.
Yeah.
Now, I have maybe a tricky question, but I'm sure some of our listeners have these questions. So if you have somebody who has, let's say, a different brain wiring, like somebody like myself, I have ADHD, or somebody else who might be neurodivergent, and or somebody who is in recovery from a substance use disorder, have you seen it be effective for people who have different nervous systems?
So I feel like you should probably have a follow-up podcast specifically on this and invite a couple of my staff several on my staff are neurodivergent and ADHD. So they would be experts. I won't name any names without their permission, but there's two in particular I can think of who have been working with this medicine for 20 years and who are also neurodivergent and ADHD. So I think it would be really great for you to have like call on them. And I am structured AF. So I'm like the opposite, almost to a fault sometimes. But, anecdotally, I have heard that this has helped people because it tends to get people into like a focus state. It tends to kind of calm and reset the nervous system a little bit, right? So I think that there's benefits pretty much for everybody, to answer your question in kind of a generic way.
No, that's great. And I think, I've done a fair amount of reading about ADHD and PTSD, and I understand sometimes those two get confused or they overlap one another. And a lot of young persons, or even, as we grow up, may actually be experiencing PTSD, but it looks a lot like ADHD because, of course, if you are hypervigilant and focused on a trauma, you're not going to be as focused on other things. You might be easily distracted, right? And so it seems to me, just my gut feeling here, and I think confirmed by your colleagues working with this and your own experience seeing it work on people with some sort of trauma, whether it's PTSD level or just other trauma, as well as neurodivergence. Like, it seems to me it would be highly effective. I wonder, and it'll be interesting when I talk to them, if they let me talk to them, is if they experience things more, not acutely is maybe the wrong word, but experience it more because, like my inner world, for instance, is very rich, right? Part of the way that ADHD is for me, which is the cool part of the ADHD, right?
Yeah, absolutely.
Is this, very rich inner world. So very visual, very auditory. My senses are very heightened. And that's part of the blessing and the curse, right? The curse is sometimes everything's a little too HD, right? So it would be very interesting to talk with them about that. But I suspect that it's just, like you said, just as effective.
I think so. Yeah.
I don't know if you have experience with this or if also your colleagues could talk about this. Is there are those of us, like I'm in recovery, been sober for 24 years, and intrigued with this as something. And obviously Michael Pollan's book and the docuseries talks about treatment for addiction and substance use disorders. But those of us who have been sober a bit are like, how does this square with that? Do you have any thoughts on that?
I do, because we actually have seen quite a few people who have come in to change their relationship with alcohol specifically, and it's run the gamut from just, hey, I'm a habitual drinker and I would just like to cut back. I'm not trying to go to AA or be completely sober. I just want to change the priority in my life, to up to people that we have actually recommended, like, you need to ensure you're not having withdrawal symptoms. You need to be, probably go to a rehab for a little while and then come see us. We just want to make sure that this is safe for you. So we've seen the full gamut come through there, but yeah, absolutely. And sometimes we'll have that conversation in a consult where someone, just a recent one, came in and was like, I'm really interested in doing this, but I'm concerned about that this is like just another drug, right? So the very first step is making sure that your relationship towards psilocybin and your thoughts towards it is helpful and not harmful, right? So kind of helping to reframe it from, drug or the narratives around this is a Schedule 1 controlled substance, all those narratives that got set up in the late 1960s, kind of reframing those to, hey, this is a natural substance that's been around before humans, right? Since the age of the dinosaurs, really. So thinking of it as more of kind of a medicine versus like a drug that you're going to get addicted to, I think is just important reframing to happen. So that has to happen on the client's end, right? And then the second thing is we can give a little education around psilocybin. All classic psychedelics are actually anti-addictive. So they work on serotonin receptors. And once serotonin receptors are sensitized to a certain, or once they're full, they kind of just shut off, they downregulate. And so it's really like not possible to become addicted to psilocybin. And so that's why it helps with so many other things that are highly addictive, is because it's not. So we do provide usually a little bit of education around like, hey, this is a different substance. But it's ultimately up to them to make that decision of when I go in for this, am I going to feel like I'm just doing another drug? Because if that is the way they feel, it's probably not going to be helpful for them.
Right, right. It's really, like you said, their relationship, their thought patterns, how their feelings are about the medicine that they're about to take or not.
Absolutely. Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, no, that's really interesting. And I mean, and it's funny that, and I mean, that just goes to show you that the powers that be did a really good job making it into this kind of evil drug.
Yeah.
Because it is hard to think of it otherwise, when in reality, I would never think of an SSRI as something that somebody shouldn't take if they needed it.
Yeah.
And it's really in many ways no different, in the sense that if you're taking it for a therapeutic reason, it has a therapeutic value.
Yeah, absolutely. We have a blog post actually up on our site, on the Fractal Health site, that's about the safety and efficacy of psilocybin that I point clients to quite a bit. But at the top of that post, it actually has a chart of the active versus lethal dose and the potential for dependence. So it charts various substances. And of course, all the way up here is like heroin, right, and meth. But it also includes things like nicotine and caffeine and alcohol and other things. And it's clear down here on the lower left is LSD and psilocybin. And that's because they're both classic psychedelics working on the serotonergic system. So it's really helpful, I think, sometimes for clients to see all of those different substances panned out, and they see actually how low potential for dependence and low active versus lethal dose it is. I mean, you'd have to eat like 33 pounds of mushrooms to actually get to a lethal dose. Like it's physically impossible to overdose, on psilocybin. You could, of course, take an overwhelming dose, but the physical acute toxicity is very low on psilocybin mushrooms. Right. So that's helpful sometimes for people to just reframe it.
Yeah. And on the other end of things, I mean, totally different subject. One of the things that struck me from my own experience with psilocybin is the consciousness opening aspect of it. And, mine wasn't guided and facilitated, so I can only imagine what it would be like when it's in a setting that is a therapeutic setting, facilitated by somebody who's always keeping you safe and holding space for you there. Yeah. And so there is this aspect. I mean, not everyone has to go in for this, but you certainly could. And I've read and heard that this is a result for a lot of people, is this sort of consciousness expanding, almost spiritual, or maybe truly spiritual experience. Is that something?
Yeah, not almost. It is.
Say more about your own experience and or what you've seen in your clinic.
It's my personal opinion that one of the therapeutic benefits of psilocybin is that it does tend to make you feel very connected to the rest of humanity, to the world around you, to the universe, right? And so that is a very predictable outcome of psilocybin, for, again, through unknown mechanisms, but very, very predictable result, especially towards the tail end of a journey. It's very common for people to feel like, wow, I just feel not alone anymore. I don't feel as isolated anymore. I realize that maybe even if I have a tough relationship with my family or don't have super close friends, that doesn't seem to matter as much because I just feel like I belong, right? And that is just such a therapeutic benefit in general, to have that weight lifted. The definition of spirituality really is just that you experience or believe in something that's larger than yourself, and it doesn't have to fit into a religious framework. And that's kind of what's wonderful about psilocybin as well, is it really kind of fits into a bunch of different traditional religious frameworks and also just more general spirituality. But from my own experience, I mean, I was telling you earlier, I was raised in a very conservative Christian home, went to a Christian college. And then after that, there's kind of a series of life events and a lot of studying. Again, I'm intellectual, so I studied a lot. And I like to joke with people, I kind of studied my way out of that religious framework, because the more I studied, to me, just the more it didn't make sense. So what I ended up doing was swinging that pendulum the other way for 10 years and just became like hardcore atheist, skeptic, science only, everything else is BS. And I lived in that world for a while and it was fine. But then I still felt like there was something missing. And honestly, psychedelics have really helped me kind of just reconnect with this greater sense of I am connected to other human beings. I am connected to all life on this planet. I am connected to potentially life on other planets that we don't even know. You just get this sense that you're like part of this great network, right? Which I think is really beautiful. And certainly that's something I experienced in my own. And in my own, it's actually gotten much more specific, not just the connection, but actually feeling specific spiritual entities talking to me as well, which I know some people would say, oh, that's just a hallucination or what. But to me, it felt very meaningful. And it's always been very benevolent and teaching me about wisdom, wise things like the importance of love. And, it's never been superfluous. So whether you want to call it reality or not reality, it's been very meaningful to me and really beneficial. So it's become a spiritual practice of mine to just sit with this sacrament, this medicine, whatever you want to call it, on a regular basis, because even after I've healed, my grief and my trauma from various prior life events, I consider it now an ongoing spiritual practice where I just go and sit with these unknown spiritual mentors who teach me about various things. And I learn so much in every single session of mine. So that's now my own brand of spirituality, I guess you could say.
Yeah, and I was struck in the Michael Pollan docuseries and in the book, he talks with a few people who were diagnosed with cancer and or aging and otherwise close to death.
Yeah, end of life distress. Yeah,
end of life distress, which is really significant. And one of the doctors who was interviewed talked about how that actually the psychological stress, the emotional distress, often outweighed the physical symptoms of what the person was experiencing. And what really struck me was one woman who was interviewed, who was, I think, in the series, 78 years old or thereabouts, had a cancer diagnosis. She was talking with the author and describing something very similar to what you described, a spiritual experience.
Yeah.
And he said, well, that was just in your mind. And she said, and she just looks dead on and said, no, that was real.
Mm-hmm. Wow.
And, that was real. And that's what I'm getting from you is this, it's not, sure, you could always hang your hat on, okay, this was a hallucinogen and this is why I felt this way. But from what I understand, everyone who experiences it as something that is very real. It doesn't feel drug induced. It feels authentic, right?
Absolutely. I'm careful and respectful when I'm speaking to audiences who have never experienced this before. And I'm aware that if you have never experienced it before, because I was one of those people, right? It was hardcore skeptic. So I was that person for a really long time. And so I kind of laugh at myself all the time that I've swung the other way. But to me and to so many other people I've spoken to, it doesn't feel like you are plugging into something that's not real, with this world like hallucinogen. It feels like you're uncovering something that is real, right? And so every single time it feels so authentic and so rich, with whatever is said or whatever messages that I receive. And so definitely, I know different people have different opinions and that's perfectly fine, but my own perspective has been that I feel like I'm plugging into this unknown mechanism of some sort of power source, right? And the power source is driven by love. That was taught to me in my last one, that love is really the source of power, true power, with humanity, which I thought was beautiful, right? Because we always think of these power mechanisms in terms of war and violence and brute force and all of these things. And so it was really beautiful to sit with the medicine. And this is kind of like a feminine goddess type of spirit that was appearing to me and teaching me about love. And I thought that was really beautiful. I think I kind of lost my train of thought there, but I was just trying to share a little bit around what my spiritual experiences have been. And it definitely feels like I'm there is a mystical element to it. I don't want to shy away from that, right? There's something mystical, there's something unknown. Humans do not know everything, but when you do plug into it and you experience it for yourself, you don't feel like you're thinking or believing it anymore. It's this deep kind of knowing that's right here in your soul.
Yeah.
And that feels really special and really sacred to me.
I love that, a deep kind of knowing.
Mm.
I'm wondering, do you feel that connection even if you're not in a journey? So it's a lasting connection that you feel?
I will say that the more times I have sat with psilocybin, the more that it does last. So after the first one, I had this kind of spiritual glow of feeling connected to everything for maybe a month or two. And then after my second one, it was like 2 or 3 months. And now I almost feel like it's just kind of this constant. It definitely used to be that I could feel like the medicine coming in and then leaving my body very specifically. And now it feels like I feel like I'm done with the journey itself, but I still feel there's like a presence there all the time, which is kind of cool. So I can call on it in times of stress, which is really helpful. But, I think 8, I've sat with it 8 times now. And certainly I'm still a baby in the grand scheme. I know people have sat with it dozens and dozens of times, but each one for me is like, I make sure that I don't treat it recreationally. This isn't doing something for fun. It's like I am in a zone and setting up the setting and having my candle and my sacred music and all of these things. So I go really deep each time and it just means a lot to me.
Yeah, no, I love that. Just kind of closing in on the end here, which I don't really want it to end, but just on the end, what are you hoping is next for psilocybin and journeys, and where are you hoping we go as a culture?
I mean, certainly we see these individual healing stories, but we need that to happen at scale, right? If we want hope of changing humanity and making a better world for our future generations. So that's one thing, certainly, and I know in the Western world, we have a lot of laws and regulations. So all of that has to change. And I'm excited and encouraged to see all the different states that are looking into it, or they've got panels, or they have funding for research. That ball is rolling, but it feels slow sometimes. On the other side of things, something I'm really excited about that I just met with someone last week. A lot of people come in and ask us about insurance coverage because, these services are not cheap. Again, we spoke earlier that this isn't product based. You're not coming into a dispensary and just buying some product and leaving. Most of the expense is working with the facilitator. So it's very service industry based, right? So that person is paid for their time. So that's 80% of the cost, right? The product is actually pretty negligible. As is, you go in and you might want to you reserve a room as well, and that costs money. But most of it is the service base, very similar to like a talk therapist, right? You pay them $100 an hour or whatever it is. So it's not accessible to some people who are making under 6 figures a year, right? And they might desperately need it. So we have equity programs and things like that, but still it just is inaccessible to some people. So I just met with somebody last week. She's the CEO of a insurance company that specializes in psychedelic therapy coverage. And we're going to be partnering with them, the long and short of it, which is wonderful because they're already covering ketamine. They're going to be launching psilocybin therapy insurance in Oregon, July 1st. And so we're going to be in network with them. And that means that if they've got their employers on board, and it could be any nationwide employer, it doesn't have to be in Oregon. So if they're on board and the employer is kind of bought in, then those employees can start getting insurance coverage for this, it's just mind-blowing. I really thought this was going to be a year or 2 out before we could even look at insurance coverage. So the fact that we could start potentially offering it this summer is just I'm ecstatic about it because more people need these services, right? And
100%. Yeah, more people need mental health. We have a crisis going on, and this seems to be a really effective modality for quite a few people. And so it would be great if it were accessible to more, and that's exciting.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. So that's where we're headed.
Awesome. So how can people find out more about you and your clinic and what services are available, or anything else you want us to know?
Yeah, sure. Absolutely. The actual center is called Fractal Soul. We're located in Beaverton, Oregon, which is the home of a bunch of the tech campuses. We're close to Nike headquarters and all of that. So it's about 15 minutes west of downtown Portland. FractalSoulPDX.com is that website. We also, and that's for the physical on-site service center, by the way. So where you would go to physically buy your mushrooms and have your experience. And then we have a sister company called Fractal Health Consulting. That's really the services and the education arm. So that's staffed with all of our facilitators. So So we do have two separate websites, but you can get the same information on both websites in terms of the services that we offer, the pricing, meeting our team, all of that. So it's fractalsoulpdx.com and fractalhealthpdx.com are the two sister websites. I would say start there, and then we've got an eligibility form on that site too, because it's got some screening questions just to make sure that we're legally able to offer psilocybin services to our clients. Yeah.
Yeah, that's great. And I'll make sure to put those in the show notes as well. Is there anything that we didn't talk about that you were hoping we would talk about?
One thing that I always like to tell people, they want to know if it's going to work for them. And so I like to tell people like what it's really good at and what it's not so good at. So I'll just, I guess, leave you with this, which is psilocybin is really, really good at getting you unstuck that we talked about earlier. So if you have something that is, prior in your life, not something fresh trauma, but like childhood, or there's been some time that's passed and you're just unable to let go, psilocybin is really, really good at helping you release that and process it so that you can be healed from it permanently. And this is where we see those literal overnight results. Even with people who have lifelong OCD, for example, we've had at least a dozen clients in that they go through one session, and on the other side of it, they're like, I just don't have OCD anymore. Like it feels like a distant memory, Wow. So it's really good at that. What it's not good at is fixing environmental things, like fixing a bad relationship or a bad job. If you're going through an actively traumatic, like a divorce or housing instability, psilocybin is not a good time for you because it acts as a non-specific mental amplifier. And sometimes it can actually amplify the anguish and the negative emotions that you have. So it's definitely better for like stuff that you're stuck with than something like fresh, I would say. So I wanted to make sure that I covered that as well in our session.
Thank you so much. And I appreciate your time. And this has just been a fascinating conversation. And I can't wait to have maybe parts 2 and 3. So more on that later.
Sure. I'll reach out to my staff that are neurodivergent. I'm sure that they would be happy. At least one of them would be happy to come on and just talk. If you wanted to have kind of a specialty episode, that would be great.
I think that would be great. I think listeners would be really interested. So
Awesome.
Thank you very much. And I know I'll be talking with you soon.
Sounds good. All right. Thank you so much.
Hey everybody, it's Melissa, and I'm wondering if you all can relate. Have you ever caught yourself procrastinating or maybe doubting your abilities, or maybe you have a black belt inner critic like I do or have had that wants to sabotage your every move with judgment and perfectionism expectations? It might keep you stuck, it might keep you anxious and away from your full potential. The Positive Intelligence Program, PQ, is a powerful 6-week journey designed to help you quiet those saboteurs, embrace positivity, and find flow in your life. Through daily practices and weekly focuses, we'll work together to build your mental fitness. The PQ app will guide you every step of the way and support you, and you'll be supported either by myself in a one-on-one or in a small group of like-minded individuals where you can share insights and progress. So reach out, contact me at info@thefullymindful.com to find out how we can work together one-on-one or in a small group today.